Ladies and gentlemen, the Shun Hing Lecture by Dr. Victor Joseph Dzau now begins. I'm Teresa Chan, a Year 2 medical student. Today, we are greatly honored to have our guest, Dr. Victor Dzau, to deliver a lecture at the university. First, I would like to invite Professor Chen Wai-yi, Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, to deliver a welcoming address and to introduce Dr. Dzau. Professor Chan, please.
Dr. Dzau, Dr. Mong, Ms. Mong, students, ladies and gentlemen. The year 2018 marks the 55th anniversary of the Chinese University of Hong Kong and the 65th anniversary of the Shun Hing Group. The Shun Hing Group contributes tremendously to education and society as a whole. On behalf of the university, I would like to sincerely thank the Shun Hing Group for its staunch support over many years. When it was inaugurated in 2013, the lecture series covered 4 key areas: drama and film, literature and arts, music, philosophy, and thinking. After 5 years of lectures, the series has opened up to other disciplines, like medicine. So today, we are benefiting from that, and it is our great honor to have with us an internationally acclaimed leader and one of the most influential medicine scholars, Dr. Victor Joseph Dzau. Dr. Dzau was born in China and grew up in Hong Kong. He is the president of the U.S. National Academy of Medicine and vice chair of the U.S. National Research Council. He is also Chancellor Emeritus and James B. Duke Professor of Medicine at Duke University. Dr. Dzau was formerly Professor of Medicine and Chairman of Medicine at Harvard Medical School, as well as Chairman of Medicine at Stanford University. Dr. Dzau is a preeminent global medical scientist and leader in healthcare. He has made significant contributions to cardiovascular medicine and genetics, and developed life-saving drugs known as ACE inhibitors, which are globally used to treat hypertension and heart failure. He is in the forefront of gene therapy for vascular disease and cardiac regeneration by microRNA-induced direct reprogramming. Dr. Dzau is first and foremost a leader in healthcare. His innovative research led important initiatives, such as the Commission on the Global Health Risk Framework for the Future, the Human Genome Editing Initiative, and vital directions for health and healthcare. His foresight in innovation plan laid the foundation for the launch of the National Academy of Medicine Grand Challenges in Healthy Longevity, which inspire all disciplines and sectors to discover and stimulate new research and solutions around healthy longevity. Dr. Dzau serves in the board and in the advisory committee of a number of international organizations. He received a number of significant awards and honors, which I'm not going to list because there are too many. Now, among his many honors and recognitions are the American Heart Association Distinguished Scientist Award, the Max Delbruck Medical from Germany, the commemorative gold medal from the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, and the Henry Friesen International Prize. In 2014, he received a Public Service Medal from the President of Singapore. He is a member of the National Academy of Medicine, American Academy of Arts and Science, UK Academy of Medical Sciences, Academia Sinica, and European Academy of Science and Arts. He has received 13 honorary doctorates, including one from Hong Kong University. In this lecture entitled Medical and Technological Breakthrough, Shaping the Future of Health and Medicine and the Implications for Society, Dr. Dzau will discuss the potential for innovation and technology in the future of health and medicine, and the implication for society. Science and technology are moving at an extremely rapid pace and paving the way for exciting new development in health and medicine. All of us are witnessing medical breakthrough in genetic engineering, regenerative medicine, and tissue engineering, immunocancer therapy, and precision medicine, big data analytics, and artificial intelligence. Dr. Dzau will explain how these advances in science and technology will transform all aspects of health and healthcare, from disease treatment to cure to early detection and prevention with the emergency of precision public health. I'm sure all of you in the lecture will enjoy Dr. Dzau's insight. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Dzau.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chang and Dr. and Mrs. Mong, and all distinguished guests and students. I was supposed to give this lecture yesterday. I'm glad you're still here. But it's a great honor for me to give the Shun Hing Lecture. If you look at the previous speakers and the areas you've covered, which is really broad in music, arts, philosophy, I'm here to tell you about health, medicine, and technology. So to me, it's a great honor for many different reasons. First, last Wednesday, as I was anticipating a hurricane in the United States, my wife and I left early just to come here to escape the hurricane, but I think I brought it together, the typhoon here, all together. So then we had this problem of how should I give this lecture yesterday when the day after typhoon, the roads are blocked. So I'm glad we're able to make some of the changes of my calendar to be here today. As you heard, I grew up in Hong Kong, and so coming back to Hong Kong means a lot to me. It means a lot to me because I have many friends here. Edgar Chen's one of my very good friends who's in the audience today. But importantly, I actually received my education, my elementary, high school education here. I was brought up here and has great influence on my own life. So every chance I have, I want to be able to come back, connect with all of you, and perhaps share my life's experience with you. Certainly Hong Kong, I feel I own a great debt of gratitude, and it's really my second home. So thank you, Dr. Mong, for honoring me for giving this lecture. And so the question I thought I'll tackle today is, where is medicine going? With all the very exciting things in science and technology, one can imagine a very exciting future. The question is, are we prepared for it? And it also, along with the technology, raised a lot of issues which have implications on society. Are we well prepared for it? I want to begin by showing this slide. In health and medicine, we face enormous global challenges, but also opportunities. Non-communicable chronic disease, which is obesity, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, cancer, is rising quickly. The population is aging globally, but also increasingly there's disparity between those who have and those who have not. And of course, SARS, H1N1, H7N5, and most recently Ebola continue to erupt as emerging infections. This is driven to a large part in changes in lifestyle, in the substantial urbanization of the globe, also of climate change. I guess we witnessed this past week, and of course, globalization. So as we think about what's ahead of us, we think about some of the biggest disease burdens, cardiovascular disease and cancer. Cardiovascular disease is number one cause of death globally. About 18 million or more people die from cardiovascular disease. It's about 31% of all global deaths. And cancer is the number two cause of death, with 9 million or more people dying globally, 1 in 6 deaths. And the number is rising rapidly. And of course, this is all in the setting of an aging population in the globe. If you look at these numbers, by 2015 to 2050, you would have double the number of people over 65 or 60. And of course, older people usually have more chronic conditions, infirmities of aging such as Alzheimer's, diabetes, and etc. And as you can see, Alzheimer's affect more than 3% of the population between 65 and 69, but almost 30% of those aged between 85 and 89. These are significant numbers, and these are real numbers, and the numbers are only going to get worse. If you look at Hong Kong, this is the last data I can find in 2015. The leading cause of death in Hong Kong is cancer, heart disease, diabetes, pneumonia, as you can see in this slide. But look at the population demograph. Now your average life expectancy is 84 years old. It's probably one of the oldest in the world, along with Japan and others. But the percent of the elderly population, defined as 65, by the way, I'm over 65, so I don't use the word elderly. It's a mature population. You can see there's about doubling that number by 2030. That's not too far from now. And the other factor, and I'm so glad to see how many young people here, is actually a younger population shrinking. Fertility rate is going down. And if you look at this curve, the traditional human pyramid would be a big base of younger people as you go up there with older population. Now this curve is beginning to change, and if we continue this way, you have an inversion of the pyramid with more older people on the top and much fewer younger people at the bottom. These are trends that we have to deal with globally because they have substantial implication in health, in social factors, in workforce, and so many other issues. Certainly, when you get older, you have more likely to have Alzheimer's, heart disease, and cancer. So with that, I say we have a lot of work to do in medicine, and it's really important to create a strategy to really address and stem this rising epidemics of chronic disease. So what do we need to do? Health, promoting health is one of the most important issues. And of course, prevention of disease. But also the idea of early diagnosis and detection, better access to affordable treatment. And what I want to talk today is on transformative science and technology, those breakthroughs which will change the way we care for patients and that would actually improve health and improving health care. So this is just the general three categories of breakthroughs: biomedicine, biotechnology, engineering science, nanotechnology, and of course data, robotics, artificial intelligence. Clearly all those areas overlap with each other. There's tremendous interaction between these three areas. But let's take a look at medical breakthroughs. Here I've listed what I can just at the back of an envelope written down all the ideas I have, and I'm probably missing a lot of things. But look how exciting it is the last 10, 20 years. Breakthroughs in genetic engineering, in regenerative medicine, in immunotherapy, synthetic biology, precision medicine, the microbiome, and tissue engineering, just to name a few. Let me take a few minutes to describe to you some of these technology. Human gene editing. As many of you know, this is a form of genetic engineering, and the recent discovery of CRISPR-Cas9 system, along with other gene editing tools such as TALEN and zinc-fingered nucleases, allows one to take a sequence of DNA from a genome, remove it, or remove a disease gene, or you can even replace the gene with a normal gene. And you can actually enhance the gene with a more effective gene. So human gene editing has tremendous potential. Imagine applying this to genetic diseases. So you can see on your right-hand side is germline. Those you inherit from your parents. The germline editing allows you to alter genes in the embryo or maybe even the gametes, sperms and eggs, so that you actually remove the disease gene and able to transmit a normal gene to subsequent population. You can imagine how this can be used effectively for cystic fibrosis, for many other inherited diseases. The flip side is somatic therapy, which is applying this technology in an acquired disease fashion, not in germline. So this is a very good example of HIV. It is now known, of course, that HIV virus enters the T cells through a receptor called CCL5. And that's how you get immune deficiency, because then it then kills the T cells. So through genetic editing, scientists are able to actually put in a mutated CCL5 so that HIV cannot enter the T cells. Subsequently, when you do that in the bone marrow, and you do that in circulating T cells, and you infuse it back to the patient, HIV patients suddenly now are less prone to invasion by HIV and more responsive to triple therapy. And now over several hundred patients been tested in this fashion with very good results. So you can imagine that this technique can be applied in so many different areas and can be truly curative, as you can imagine. What about regenerative therapies? Well, first of all, there are stem cells, embryonic stem cells, adult stem cells that people have done work on and are looking at the possibility of regenerating tissues after injury. In my own laboratory, we've been working on some of these stem cells as well. But iPS cells, inducible pluripotent stem cells, this is a work by Yamanaka in Japan, won the Nobel Prize. What he was able to show is that if you can take an adult cell like a skin fibroblast and then just genetically manipulate it and convert it into a stem cell-like cell or embryonic stem cell. This way, you don't have to actually use embryonic stem cells. I can use your cells, generate a stem cell, and then use it for regeneration. Even more advanced, in my opinion, is direct reprogramming, work that we're doing in our laboratory that allows us to say, let's just take genetic material, such as microRNA or transcription factors, put it into an adult cell, and tell that cell to become a different type of somatic cell. In our work, we're trying to convert fibroblasts to cardiomyocytes so you can regenerate the myocardium after injury. And finally, of course, tissue engineering. So you can imagine this possibility in this area, particularly in treating diseases of degeneration or damage such as heart attack and strokes. In brain science, there's tremendous advances also. First, optogenetics, the ability to study neural circuits in vivo by actually expressing a channel rhodopsin, which is in fact, as you know, a several-transmembrane molecule that is responsive to light, so that when you shine a light, it can activate a neuron. You can begin to dissect out the wiring of the brain. And on the other side, what you can see is brain-machine interface, the ability to use your brain coupled through electrodes or EEG, non-invasive electrodes, to drive robots so that a robot can move according to your command. And what you see in here is a quadriplegic who can use his arm. By using brain-machine interface, he's now able to lift a robotic arm to actually do a whole series of functions. And of course, there's precision medicine. We can sequence a genome for less than $1,000, probably $500 or even less. But it's not only ability to sequence genome, but also the ability to get computation, big data, social sciences, all this information together can help you use big data analytics to more precisely predict what you're most likely responsive to, at risk for disease, and all those environmental issues. So with that, I think there's tremendous excitement in biology, and I've only shown you a few examples in a very short time. But what about the engineering side and digital technology? What you can see here is GPS tracking devices, wearables, telehealth, remote patient monitoring, robotic caregivers, smart homes, autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. All this is exploding in the midst of what we do every single day. And of course, big data. as you imagine the ability to not only get electronic health record, but health insurance claims, geospatial data, social media, and of course, all the wearables, there's huge amount of opportunity information along with machine learning and artificial intelligence to really change things dramatically. So what does the future look like? Well, here, artificial intelligence revolution healthcare certainly touted that technology can outperform human being in areas such as maybe pathology, radiology, and several other areas. So I would say that just as this introduction, the implication for health for the future is quite substantial. You can imagine if all these things come to bear and they're effective, that you can actually have better prevention, prediction, and early detection. You have more effective treatment to cure of diseases, better understanding of health and disease, form a seamless continuum of care, change the way care is delivered, and even assist you in personal decisions, healthcare decisions. Now let me give you maybe a slightly deeper dive in two areas, first cardiovascular and then cancer, and see how things are changing the way these two areas are being cared for. As I mentioned, cardiovascular disease. Think about the drugs you take now, or many drugs that people at my age take, statins, which is discovered a couple of decades ago, ACE inhibitor that I've been involved with working that treats hypertension, heart failure, and many other drugs. But also, as I mentioned, cardiac regeneration, cell therapy, advanced imaging diagnosis. But look at the phenomenal engineering devices that's available. Ventricular assist device used for end-stage heart failure, transcatheter valve placement, leadless pacemaker without leads, robotic surgery, remote sensing. As you can see in the slide, in the picture that's showed here, you can portable echo with point-of-care interpretation at a great distance and remote monitoring using your iPhone. All these are now within reach, in one form or the other, being tested in human. As I mentioned, in cardiac regeneration, after you have a massive heart attack or heart failure, it's now possible, at least experimentally, to regenerate the myocardium. We're all looking forward to the work now, as I mentioned, towards really proving in human. In Japan, in tissue engineering, you can see the word patch. It's already possible to use a patch and put muscle cells and stem cells, and now they're in human treatment altogether. So I think one of the really exciting areas is the convergence of understanding genetics and the tools that you have with monoclonal antibodies, RNAi, and gene editing. And I want to use PCSK9 as an example. PCSK9 is a gene that actually, when mutated, with a loss of function mutation, which is reported here in New England Journal of Medicine, that this population have much low cholesterol. And as you can see in the panel B, coronary artery heart disease substantially reduced. So PCSK9 must be contributing to high cholesterol and increase in coronary artery disease. And its mutation obviously prevents it to do so. So what is PCSK9? What you can see here is a typical cell, a liver cell, hepatocyte, where most of the cholesterol is synthesized and also cleared. And of course, circulating cholesterol is cleared by the LDL receptor, shown in the upper panel. This LDL receptor, shown here, binds LDL and internalizes into endosome, in which case the receptor is recycled to the surface where the LDL cholesterol is degraded. PCSK9 is a molecule made within the liver cell which actually binds to LDL receptor or is released and binds LDL receptor. When it binds LDL receptor, it internalizes and destroys the LDL receptor. So consequently, if you have too much PCSK9, you have lower LDL receptor and therefore lower clearance of LDL cholesterol and therefore high LDL cholesterol. And that's the explanation for mutation, right? Therefore, when you have, in fact, a mutation of PCSK9, there's no removal of the LDL receptor. Therefore, you have much more receptor in clear cholesterol in circulation. Now, what happened, of course, is that with that background, people have come up with the idea, of using monoclonal antibodies. What if you bind PCSK9 in circulation with a monoclonal antibody? This should remove PCSK9 and therefore allow plenty of receptors to recycle, removing more and more cholesterol circulation. Of course, as you all know, there are 2 drugs now available using monoclonal antibody. And in fact, they're extremely effective. The second approach would be to use a new technology called RNAi, which is silencing messenger RNA, as shown down here. In RNAi, which you can actually introduce into the cell, it will bind the messenger RNA and prevent the formation of PCSK9, which is even better than removal by monoclonal antibodies. And most recently, in a phase 2 study by Alnylam, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, 1 administration of RNAi results in a sustained reduction in cholesterol in humans up to 200 days. So now you can imagine we're moving from repeated oral administration of a drug, repeated injection of monoclonal antibody to a single injection of RNAi. Now think about the future. What if you use gene editing? What if you put the gene editing technique into your liver cells and therefore remove, right here, edit out the PCSK9 gene? I would say there's a possibility that this technique will allow many people with cholesterol problems to be treated permanently and with the use of gene editing technique of removing that gene. So that's the kind of excitement one can imagine. Now, when it comes to early detection prevention in cardiovascular disease, you can imagine imaging, biomarkers, genomics, proteomics, precision medicine, particularly as it applied to public health. Just like cholesterol is being measured now, some 60 years ago, introduced by Framingham, you can imagine using precision medicine in a population basis to look at what is, in fact, who's vulnerable to various diseases. To behavioral therapy, where digital apps can help perhaps people to look what they eat and what they decide to do, increase physical activity, to actually a new concept called neutral genomics, the idea of knowing what you're likely to respond to, what kind of food are you likely to respond to by simply profiling your genomics. So all this is in the horizon in cardiovascular area. What about cancer? Well, everybody knows that cancer genomics, being able to sequence cancer, cancers are made of a multitude of individual different types of diseases based on genetic mutation. So even though morphologically the cancer may look alike, in fact, they may be made of all different types of molecular abnormalities. By being able to sequence the genome of cancers allow you to have more targeted therapy, as shown here, and more now you can treat cancer as those individual diseases with successful targeted therapy. But I think what's really exciting is cancer immunotherapy. This is said to be the breakthrough of the year in 2013. What scientists have discovered is that cancer cells can secrete materials that actually suppress your immune system. And therefore, you have less immune surveillance to tackle and to kill the cancer cells. So these areas are called checkpoints. And therefore, using monoclonal antibodies against these checkpoint proteins, one is able to show significant result in activation of your immune system to attack the cancer and coming out to actually even sometimes cure the cancer. Immunotherapy has been shown to be useful in lymphoma. It's been approved by FDA in melanoma, many others. There's also another way used called adoptive cell transfer, that is taking your T cells and genetically manipulate them so that, in fact, the T cell receptors and others are more active, so they become active cells to attack cancer. So cancer immunotherapy is getting very, very exciting. So is early imaging and diagnosis with CT scan, PET scanning, and many others, and importantly, of course, early detection. The early detection of using a drop of blood where you can actually measure the DNA or circulating in those blood to look at whether you have entered cancer cells and cancer mutation. In fact, Dennis Low in Hong Kong has done some very significant work in this area and has really opened the field in many different ways. So cancer can also be prevented. If you look at 1/3 of deaths from cancer due to 5 leading behavioral dietary risks, and 30 to 50% of cancer actually can be prevented. So now there are, of course, screening strategies, vaccination for HPV and HBV, lifestyle, and of course, changes in environment. So all this says greatly that in cardiovascular cancer, there's lots of advances. What about big data and robotics and AI? Now, with machine learning and deep neural networks, one is now able to use artificial intelligence to help clinical decisions and to care for patients, as well as using big data mining to get data analytics to inform you about many different information that can help you manage the patients. So big data can bring together diverse large sets of data beyond healthcare, bringing together environmental factors, social behavioral issues, and other information, help you understand the role of social determinants, apply new knowledge and evidence to have stronger analytic power, and finally, as I said, assist you in personal decisions. So just imagine the future. Huge data can help you change the way you deliver care, the way you engage your patients, the way you operate in healthcare environment, in research, in precision medicine, and even in medical education. So I think the future of care delivery is very exciting. That is to say, it will influence when care is delivered, where is care delivered, who is delivering care, who's making diagnosis, who's making clinical decision, and then can improve productivity. As you can see in the first column, a selfie measuring retina, you can actually see, and there are now, as you know, artificial intelligence where you can measure diabetic retinopathy by using AI to actually use this very early, the application in patients who are in remote areas to follow their, etc. You can use mobile platforms that can help providers really remotely monitor the patients. Virtual avatar can use AI to make processing remotely monitor patients. AI can help you make radiologic and pathologic diagnosis, clinical decision, and so on and so forth. And please meet Nora, my personal assistant. Nora is helping me every day to make routine tasks. Remind me to pay the bills, visit a doctor nearby, refill my prescription, monitor my health, manage my chronic disease by monitoring my diabetes, my sugar level, track my caloric intake, and of course, under care plans, improve my health IQ, and most importantly, provide me with personalized assistance altogether. So this is what we can imagine the future can look like. It's actually not that far away. Many of these things are already being used, maybe so in a smaller fashion, smaller scale, maybe more experimental, but I think all these are possibly right around the corner. Better prediction, prevention, more effective treatment to even cure diseases, and changing the way care is developed and assist in personal healthcare decisions. So, are we ready for this? I think many organizations, many economies, many countries are working very hard to be prepared. And the good news, in my feeling, is Hong Kong is well positioned to be a regional and global leader in science and technology. It has excellent universities like the Chinese University and Hong Kong University and research programs. Strong commitment of government to R&D landscape. The Lok Ma Chau Loop provides an ideal setting to attract local and overseas talents. Major investment by science and technology to boost a whole number of translational infrastructure. You have major clinical trials being done in Hong Kong, here, and of course, strong connection to international academics and proximity to China with many opportunities. So if you look at the commitment to science and technology, I would say that in February when I was here last time, the Finance Secretary allocated $50 billion for innovation and technology development. And of course, with the Hong Kong Science Park and the establishment of a task force of review science research policy led by Lap Chi Choi, I think you're well positioned to see what's in the future. Now, Lecture has led an effort to consider the development of an Institute of Biomedicine. I've been helping him on the preparatory committee. The idea of this is to create a regional biomedical hub as a magnet to draw talents from everywhere, but also to cross institutions. City University of Hong Kong, Chinese University, Hong Kong University, Technical University, all together to work collectively together to cross the boundaries between universities and to cross the boundaries between laboratories to effectively look at what is the best strategy to advance health and medicine. And so there are two really great examples of success globally. These are held out as one of the best examples. The Broad Institute in Boston, which in fact crosses MIT, Harvard, Whitehead, the hospitals, Mass General, Brigham Women's Hospital. In fact, I was on the original planning group when this was in fact first being planned and launched. And the Crick Institute, which was launched a couple of years ago in the United Kingdom, which includes the Imperial College and University College London, King's College, Wellcome Trust Cancer Research, all together bring together the very best scientists across different universities, collaborating for the greater good of the country and for science. I think the Institute of Biomedicine, at least I think, is a great concept. It will change the way biomedical science will be done in Hong Kong. It will cross-discipline, cross-institutional collaboration as a way forward for Hong Kong to be a great leader in this area, with core members from different universities all appointed within the same institute, with institute arrangement from UGC, and of course, focus on translation, technology transfer, and innovation. So this is all very exciting, I believe, for Hong Kong in the setting of some very exciting science and technology that's going on here and globally. Now, to do so, you need talent and expertise. And it's really great to see all these young people here because there's tremendous future. But in the traditional training in biomedicine, you have doctors and biological scientists. What we now need is a lot more systems engineer. We need data scientists and team science. We need behavioral scientists to, in fact, look at how you can change chronic disease. We need regulatory scientists to look at how to regulate, as I'll talk about, many of this new innovation. And we actually need communication. Scientists do a very bad job talking to the public about how exciting it is, and we need to know that the public know, particularly of the importance of science. In our country, as you know, science has been under some attack recently, where people are thinking about, well, maybe it's fake science, we don't quite treat the data. We have to be a much better communicator to the public about science. So, this is where I want to talk about the second part of my talk, which is the implications of all those technology. With all those amazing gene editing, artificial intelligence, I already told you how exciting it is for the future of health medicine, but it also raised a lot of issues. First of all, will technology increase the cost of care? Already in Hong Kong, and of course in our country, the cost of care is rising. And our country is 19% of GDP, $3 trillion a year. Unbelievable. It's not sustainable. If technology that comes in costs more and more money, maybe we can't afford it. What about access and equity? Will the poor people have access or will they not because they don't have the ability to pay? What about regulation and governance? And I'll come back to that, particularly in gene editing. What about the ethical issues? What about this massive data that everyone's collecting? Who owns the data? Who's going to share the data? Privacy and security? What about patients? We all have a right. We need to be engaged in decisions on how to use this technology. And about the practice of medicine? Doctors, machine replacing doctors, right? What about the doctor-patient relationship? Workforce, I mentioned to you already, the workforce of the future is going to look very different than workforce of today. You have to be very savvy with data, with computation, being able to use artificial intelligence, even as a doctor, and of course, social ethical issues. So I want to spend just a few minutes talking about those things. Cost. Will technology innovation drive up healthcare spending? You know, this has been promised a long time that technology will drive down spending because of efficiency, and yet we have not seen this. How do you actually make sure that your technology is not only better, but also is affordable? So the concept of cost effectiveness. In other words, I think we should pay more if the technology is clearly better, but sometimes technology is only slightly better, but they charge you a lot more. So how do you actually do cost effectiveness assessment? How do you look at long-term outcomes and savings? For example, I wrote a paper in Lancet with an economist that showed that if you were to do some testing that can predict diabetes very early, then you can intervene, you save hundreds of billions of dollars over 10, 20 years. And yet, these technologies usually are not developed mainly because reimbursement is not really in favor of this. Take the other side, hepatitis C drugs, which are very expensive in the United States, is now about $70,000 for treatment, but it cures hepatitis C. But many economies are worried about the upfront costs, which will bankrupt the system. Yet, if you look at downstream savings from liver transplantation, liver cancer, cirrhosis, is tremendous. So how do you balance between upfront cost versus long-term outcome? How do you think about immunotherapy? I just showed you the breakthrough immunotherapy. CAR-T today in the United States costs $450,000 per treatment, not counting hospitalization. So you can cure the individual, but not everybody can afford it. So these are the fundamental issues of cost and, of course, access and quality. How do you ensure equitable access to new technology, that there's no biased distribution of benefits and risk, and, of course, it won't exacerbate, which already exists, certainly in our country, maybe to some extent yours, health disparities. Those who can afford it versus who cannot. And, of course, how can you minimize the risk presented by new technologies? There are always risks in new technologies. So you need a good regulatory framework, and yet our regulatory framework is always looking at drugs from a cost-benefit issue. But now more and more, these changes in biologics are very different. And so look at the data piece. We collect a mass amount of data by everyone. How do you actually oversee, provide good oversight of the data security, right? And here the next slide shows you, remember, Facebook and Zuckerberg, Cambridge Analytica, and of course our country is worried about now, interference with election, etc. What is the right governance structure? Many of the technology move much faster than our ability to govern. And so to date, many of the governance is actually voluntary governance. So how do you actually create the right regulatory framework for the future? And of course, importantly, in the area of biologics, it is now possible to synthesize any organism called synthetic biology. You can order sequences of DNA, put it together, and create a new organism. Most recently, a scientist has actually recreated horsepox, a family of smallpox, and that's very threatening. You can imagine, how do you regulate people doing this kind of work? And of course, you worry about biosecurity and the concern, of course, of terrorism. So all these are in not only local issues, but an international governance issue. In the practice of medicine, how would digital technology affect the practice of medicine? The good news is every patient, every one of us, can actually use the digital technology to be more self-sufficient, what we call democratization of health. But on the other hand, how would that affect doctor-patient relationship? And how would it replace certain kind of providers? And what about the voice of patients, the design of many of this, and how do you encourage trust? So I think these are many of the issues that we face with. And finally, in the area of digital technology, AI, are these applications reliable? Recently, as you know, there's this application of AI to the criminal justice system, where they look at predictors through machine learning based on data of predicting who's likely to be reincarcerated. And therefore, the judge makes decision based on the profile of the individual on the data. And now it turns out that those are greatly biased against African Americans. Now, imagine in the healthcare area, most of our data on clinical trials are based on randomized controlled trials, mainly on white males. So as an Asian, as women and others, using AI and make decisions for me may not be relevant until you have unbiased data. So how do we actually make sure there's good codes of conduct? And of course, in gene editing, the ability to change your genes forever raises a lot of ethical questions, right? Boy, I tell you, I would certainly like to have a great memory and be a super intellect by altering genes in my brain. This is called gene enhancement. And if you watch the Olympics, imagine that you can actually alter the genes to greatly enhance activity. What about social equity and social systems? And would it change social norms? Do we live in a society where we not quite accept people with disability because you actually can reverse those things? And finally, of course, in economic security, these are advances in biotechnology that can shape global competitiveness. So when we were looking at our gene editing study, where I was asked to appear before Congress, and they asked the question, if US over-regulate this, will we lose out to China? Because if they have less regulation, they would have now created a lot more products, and we would be less global competitive. So these are important issues which require global discussion and international collaboration. And of course, what about food supply and military capabilities? So at the National Academies, we have decided to take this on as a really important subject. And this is our strategic plan that we have just launched a year ago. In goal number 3, called Leading the Field Transformation, we want to look at new platforms to develop innovative approaches to accelerate advancing health, science, and medicine, as I talked the first part of my talk, but also address social, ethical, and workforce implications of these changes. And we have put together 2 major committees looking at basic translational science, but also a committee on emerging science, technology, innovation, which we've made of ethicists, social scientists, economists, and of course biologists and clinicians and patients. To look at all these issues, how do we prepare ourselves much better for the future world? Now, I know in Hong Kong, you also are very active in this area. I see Derek out there. And of course, let me first talk about the fact that we have actually done many studies on bioethics and issues related such as, including the human genome editing more recently. But in Hong Kong, right here, you have a Center for Bioethics with Derek Au running it, and with the help of Edgar Chan, you can see that you are actually addressing these issues about ethical challenges to health and healthcare in contemporary Hong Kong and, of course, in other world cities. And what they intend to do is through public education, research and community dialogue, and scholarly exchange, the center will make societal awareness of these many issues I just talked about, but perhaps also forming policy that can influence your government and the public of what to do in many areas. So we've been very lucky at National Academy to have established an international health policy scholarship with the Center for Bioethics in Chinese University, generously supported by Edgar Chen. And this is a fellowship that just started in September. The first fellow will arrive in Washington and work along with us over a period of 2 years. They spend, in fact, 2-3 month periods in Washington, working with projects and then also projects over here over a 2-year period. And of course, we look forward to exchanging ideas, learning from you and each other, and begin to work on really important projects going forward. Now, also, what's very exciting is in November, the Academy of Science in Hong Kong will host the 2nd International Summit. About 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, I, at the National Academy of Medicine, together with Ralph Cicerone, then the President of the National Academy of Science, created a Science President Advisory Group on this topic. As I mentioned to you, we also appeared in front of Congress on this topic. And we decided to create an international summit. We invited the Royal Society and the Chinese Academy of Science together to create a summit attended by over 600 people from all different parts of the world and different disciplines. Out of this came phase 3, which is the report I showed you, that provides guidance about what can be done or what should be done in good science, in educating, what about in ethics, and what about clinical care. We now have decided the second summit will be held here in Hong Kong, and Lap Chi Choi, who's the president of the Academy of Science here, will help us organize this. And of course, the Royal Society, National Academy of Science and Medicine will be here, and I will be here, and the chief executive will open this meeting. You can see the dates is November 27, 29. So Hong Kong is active in so many of the important issues in biosciences, but also on ethics and also on many social and other issues as well. So I'd like to finish by saying the future looks very bright because the medical technology breakthroughs and advances will provide an armamentarium of tools that can transform, revolutionize healthcare and health. As a result, health and healthcare will be better connected digitally, electronically, will be more precise, will be more democratized. Patients are able to participate in their own care, will be people-centered with better outcomes and improved population health. But we have a lot of challenges we need to be prepared. So the extent of adoption of this technology, the implementation, the cost of care, the issue of equity, data ownership, privacy and security, social, ethical, and legal issues. We need to be prepared. We need to be intentional. We need to bring these technologies to a betterment of human beings. At the same time, we want to make sure they don't cause any harm. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dzau. Please take the seat on the stage. Dr. Dzau has kindly agreed to take a few questions from the audience. I would like to invite Professor Philip Chiu, Assistant Dean of Institutional Affairs, Faculty of Medicine, to come forward to the stage and conduct a question and answer session together with Dr. Dzau, please.
Dr. Dzau, so this is really enlightening and eye-opening lecture that we all learn about the future of how technology, including genetic engineering, stem cell, regeneration, and also robotics and AI can change what we have been doing now. So as a surgeon, I was taught to manage disease, but I can see that in the future, our next generation of doctors, they will be preventing disease from happening. So that I can imagine there will be a lot of ethical and also arguable issues. For example, if I were the patient, do I wanted to know that I would have cancer of the stomach in the next 5 years if I check the genes? And how about the relatives? And also, for example, your employer, knowing that you become having a diabetes, and then I will decide not to employ you. So there would be a lot of issues, and my specialty as a surgeon will be extinct because they will be replaced by all these automated robots. And who would take the blame if there's any medical error happen during the procedure? What would be your insight about this?
I thought I just gave a lecture on this topic. Well, I mean, I think you have just emphasized the issues that I kind of outlined in my talk. The reason I want to bring this to all your attention is because we need to start working on it, right? So on the issue of whether you want to know about your risks, I think obviously right now is a voluntary issue. Nobody can mandate this. But I would think that if we have good preventive tools, if we can change behavior, we can have early intervention, you will want to know that information. So it's possible, as I said, in precision public health, that one day, just like in cholesterol, we measure cholesterol in individuals, we know who's at risk for heart attack, and we intervene, that such things will be used pervasively, right? So I think it's a good combination of individual choice versus public health. At some point in cigarette smoking, we have intervened as a public health issue. Seat belts, and yet there are many other areas we have not intervened even though it's a public health issue. How do you achieve that balance of human rights versus the importance of, say, public intervention? It's going to be an issue we have to deal with all the time as a risk-benefit.
And how about, for example, in the future, that we are close to managing all the diseases, then the world will face a population problem. We have a growing population that now we have 7 billion, but in the future we may have not enough food and the infrastructure to support all the human beings.
I say, first of all, you have to worry about a lot more people like me, because the older population is going to get larger and larger and larger, right? And because, as I showed you, the global fertility rate is dropping. And in fact, I think you saw the number in Hong Kong under age 14, I believe. What percent was it? It's really much smaller. And that actually, this year, if you look at global curve, the number of people over 65 is rising this way. Those under 5 is dropping this way, and the curves are start crossing. So we do have a substantial issue, but this is my point. In other words, you need to keep healthy. You shouldn't think about disease care, and think about Alzheimer's. We have spent tens of billions of dollars without a solution. Isn't it much better to prevent it, right? So I've been really pushing hard on this idea of healthy longevity. In Hong Kong, you're living much longer. I would say if I look at the young people here, many of you may live to 100. Don't be surprised. My mother lived to 94, right? So, you know, I mean, we do have parents who live actually to a long age. I could live into the 90s. You will live through, the millennials will live through 100. So I think health is going to be the key issue, right? And, you know, as far as food and many global issues, obviously it comes along with it. One would hope that with a healthier population, you have more productivity, better economy, and therefore better production of food. I would also argue that with gene editing, with genetic engineering, even though there's a kind of a negative perception by public GMOs, there's no evidence for that, that these are some of the post-pop solutions. Use science and technology is going to be part of the solution.
I believe there will be some questions from the floor, and who would like to have some question for Dr. Cho?
Actually, I'd like to hear what Derek thinks. He's the leader in bioethics.
Thank you. I know there's no free lunch now that you mentioned me in the talk. I'm excited to say something.
I thought you have all the answers.
Oh, there's a recent article, this is a question more than a comment. There's a recent article that I read, which talk about the concern that it's about speed, that science is moving ahead so rapidly. It's outpacing the discussion on ethics and regulations. And the gap seems to be widened by every time you look at it, these issues, the gap seems to widen and wider. So this happens in gene editing, and I'm sure it will happen in AI and other issues as well. What's your view on the issue of science outpacing ethics?
Well, there's no question that science is rapidly outpacing governance. Shall we just say governance rather than regulation itself? And because every time you have a great idea, you will move it forward in science. And then you think about, oh, what about this? How to regulate it? Look at social media, right? And look at many other examples such as this. So I think what we're going to have to do is be a lot smarter in being able to create a framework so that when new technology is introduced, enters into a framework for assessment of some sort in order to say, is it likely to be of concern, and how do we early have a discussion on this? This is why I believe you have your center. This is why I believe that we have in our strategic plan. For those who don't know about the National Academies, the National Academy of Science, which is our parent organization, was founded by Abraham Lincoln and chartered in 1863 by Congress as an independent body to advise the government on issues like this. Now, they weren't thinking about gene editing. They were faced with civil war and other issues. But nevertheless, that's what we do. So we try to stay ahead. I use the word intentionality stay ahead of these issues and think about how to sensitize and how to get the right framework. So back to your point, I put down regulatory science up there, right? I mean, regulation now should be a science, not kind of you have to make it up because something went wrong afterwards, right? So that more and more people have to think about how to actually create the right governance structure and what in fact is the right framework, right? So in the United States, we're doing a lot of that kind of thinking, particularly in the area of biotechnology, where in fact, as I mentioned, in synthetic biology, there's no really, shall we say, formal regulatory framework. It's a trade organization that helps to share the information of what kind of DNA are people asking. Does it come up with the risk category? I think we now have to think about a much broader framework and an international framework as well.
If I may ask another question.
Yeah.
What's your thinking about the or observations or thinking about the tension or potential tension between the secular view of development and the theological or religious concerns? I'm sure that has always been an issue in the States, even now more than ever, perhaps. But perhaps it's also an issue for Hong Kong and the rest of the world.
Yeah. I'd like you to answer the question. I mean, I do think it's very clear that many of these issues also have to be in context or contextualized, that there's no one single flavor for all. You know, cultures are different, religions are different, and so on and so forth. So I think what we try to do is create an overall framework after which you really have to apply to, you know, your particular culture and religion. And to some extent, that's how I would answer your question.
Well, your talk is very stimulating. I think you make me think a lot more than I should be. Now, when we talk about genome editing, I guess you're referring to somatic genome editing. What do you think about germline gene editing? Should it be allowed? Should it be regulated? And how?
Yeah, so I was referring to both. I said in somatic editing, such as in HIV, is certainly now moving forward. You can even imagine having a genetic disease in which you use somatic rather than germline, because after all, you can obtain stem cells. You can now use iPS cells. So you can do bone marrow transplant and replace, say, hematologic disease, sickle cell, et cetera, with that without having to do embryo. The embryo gene editing, as I mentioned, is very tricky because you now find changing the genetic makeup for generations to come. Aside from the issue of who's playing God and can you do this, you also, I mean, you can also argue that the next few generations have no choice because you make the decisions for them about what kind of genetic inheritance you'd have. So the whole concern of designer babies, as you can imagine, right? Gene enhancement, many other issues. In our report, which I ask you to read if you look at National Academy's report on gene editing, we went through very careful assessment with scientists from everywhere. We have two scientists from Chinese Academy of Science, we have in Europe, et cetera. And I think we came to the conclusion that first, we should always allow science to progress because you learn a lot more by doing science, and even in germline, because you learn about developmental biology and you certainly learn about good practice. As far as application in human treatment per se, we say not yet. And also we have to relook at safety issues and of course whether each society is ready. So we're not endorsing treatment in germline, but we are supporting science in germline research, which obviously have limitations because you don't allow the embryos which are manipulated to go on to have life form.
But I think the problem is, for example, we know that in fact, even though, like if you do genome editing in stem cells, but stem cells can be actually converted to germ cells also. So that means the border, I mean, the division between somatic genome editing and germline editing is becoming more and more blurred with time.
Yeah.
So I mean, my question then is really, where should regulation start?
Yeah. So I think the conversation has started at the very beginning. This is what we're having, right? And the issue about regulation, I would say that scientific conduct, you start with scientific conduct. What is a good scientific conduct? And you would not want to enable people to use technology that is irresponsible. Clinical application, that's much easier to regulate at this point because in our country, you have to go through FDA, right? In other countries, there are other regulatory framework. In order for it to be used in human, you have to pass through those steps. I think we're always worried that what if you're a country whose regulatory agency is not quite as strong, and what if they started using this? This, in fact, is the big concern everywhere, right? If you remember, even in research, one of the papers that came out from China used an embryo and a mosaic, they show mosaicism, but an embryo which was to be discarded to do some of the work, and there was a lot of concern about, are they doing it way too early? By the way, I should let you know that what I just presented is going to come out as a paper in Science Translational Medicine at the end of this month, online, before paper form. And most of what I'm talked about, although it's more truncated, would be in that paper. Good to see you.
My question is kind of personal. What is the future of doctors? Do we still have a job? And how should we prepare a future generation of medical doctors? In other words, what should medical education be adapted?
Right. I'm glad you asked the question because I've been thinking a lot about this, and we should chat later on this. I happen to think that this is very good news for a doctor for the following reason. If I think about the mass amount of knowledge that all of us have to learn, and of course, I was of the generation who have to memorize everything. Boy, I'm glad I have a brain that's not too small. But imagine the explosion of information, and how do you actually be able to access all that information? Medical school should be 10 years, right? There'll never be enough time. So one good news is, with the ability of artificial intelligence, ability of supercomputing, you'll be able to actually access a lot of information without having to memorize them, and they can help you make clinical decisions. Now, the concern that you're implying is, what if a machine does better than we do in reading pathology specimens or radiology? And of course, some studies show that they're already better at it. If they have done millions and millions of repetitive machine learning, they can probably be more precise than some of us. That's not necessarily bad news, except, of course, there may be fewer radiologists because it will be better, at least in assisting us in making decisions. I think if we put the machines to use effectively as assistants, we'll have more time for our patients. All I hear from US doctors is they spend way too much time in front of a computer, right? So if you have your 15-minute encounter, half the time you're going to have to enter information, electronic health record. And half the time the information they ask you is not relevant to patients, more about billing, sending out bills. So I think with artificial intelligence, if you use it effectively, I would say that it gives us more time to go back to dealing with patients, because machines can replace human, in my mind, in consciousness, in emotion, and compassion, at least not for now. Not for foreseeable future, because nobody can map out the repetitive learning to do this. So I think this is where a good doctor can use machine to help make decisions, can access information faster, being able to spend more time with patients. And I think what I would suggest to you would be think about how you can reform your education along those pathways. You guys have some questions back there. Come on.
Hello. Thank you for coming and giving very insightful speech, very insightful talk. My question is, with regards to vaccination, do you think because vaccination is a public health issue, and some people take it as a rights issue. Like, I have a freedom to take vaccination or not, and my children have a right to protect my children, and I get to choose for my children if they get vaccinated or not. What's your stance on this? Do you think it's a public health issue, or do you think it's a human rights issue?
I think it's a public health issue. I mean, after all, you know about herd vaccination, right? Herd immunity. If you don't vaccinate with a population X number of individuals, you're likely to infect a lot more people, and it's a public health problem, right? So it comes back a little bit, Derek, to your question about how do we achieve the balance between, government intervention or public health interventions versus individual rights. And I think that we're still struggling through this, particularly nowadays, more and more, the public feels that they have more individual rights than they want to be told what to do. It's a matter of human trust issue as well, but I do think it's a public health issue. Let me give you an example of how you can use public health as a good way to attack a problem. In the United States, we're facing a major problem of opioid addiction and opioid overdose and death, and this is becoming a very large issue. And of course, you can look at prescriptions, education. One of the areas that we told FDA to regulate opioid is to regulate not like a regular drug. Because in the regular drug, FDA will regulate between individual patients' safety and efficacy for the individual. We told FDA that they should regulate like a public health point of view. That is that, in fact, it affects a lot more people, and therefore the regulations should be different than just safety and efficacy. And they're adopting this now, right? Which enables them to have a lot more extended authority, if you will, to look at the implications of what it means to transmission, other people getting addicted so they can come in with, and this, our current, as you know, our current FDA commissioner is very aggressive. He's now even talking about regulating vaping and prohibiting e-cigarettes, with flavors for younger people. These, to me, are public health issues, and he's well within his rights to push for those kind of regulation.
Thank you for a good lecture. I'm happy you mentioned about technology and also the cost that technology has brought to innovations in treatments. Maybe from experience, for example, I'm from Malawi and in Africa. Our experience is that we've mostly failed to adopt those effective technologies just because of the cost. But in this case now, maybe having been through this process, do you have an estimate to say if we practically go through this process, how much would it cost, for example?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. Not, as I said earlier, not all technology costs more. In fact, many of the AI applications are now in Africa, in India, elsewhere, right? Range from the use of, as I said, retinal scan, to using AI to do even appointments and remote treatment of patients, to the use of drones for supply. So these technologies are coming to, remote areas and developing countries as well. So I actually happen to believe that digital technology is going to be very big in the solution of global health, right? And they're not unaffordable. But when you have high-end technology like, immunotherapy, you're quite right. The question has to be risk versus benefit, right? So the way I look at it is you need to start with essential medicines, which we have, that everybody must have access to certain essential medicines. And above that, it does become a very tricky issue about how to make it affordable to other countries. So take hepatitis C, as you know, Gilead and Merck and others have massively reduced the cost to many countries, India, et cetera, while they maintain a differential cost in the United States. Americans don't like that very much, but it is what it is in order to make this more accessible. So perhaps that's, I don't know how to answer your question beyond this, right? It is a global dialogue that we need to have to be able to get it right.
Dr. Dzau, thank you very much for your very enlightening speech. And you have mentioned just now in your lecture about genetic editing, and we could foresee that in future when this technology is available in the market as a product or services, those people from well-off, better financial background will be the people who will be able to purchase this kind of services. So that might result in a society when the people, the richer people, will live longer, stay healthier, have better learning ability, and so on. So that would inevitably result in a society when the rich people takes it all. So what's your point, your view on this?
I think I tried to answer that earlier, right? I mean, it is a big concern, and we need to collectively work together now to think about how to make sure that it's affordable and accessible, right? And, you know, it depends on where you live and what system you live in, right? I mean, there are certainly countries, you know, like UK and others, which fundamentally have a single socialized system that can actually make sure that these technologies are available to, you know, those who need it. You know, the argument, of course, on the other side is you have long lines and you wait your turn and the cutoff could be, you know, very different than other countries. So imagine that if you look at our country, which is a more kind of a market-driven healthcare, you know, people who are older can still have cardiac surgery and many other issues. In other countries which will be more socialized, they may say we're going to cut off a certain age where we will not be willing to afford. So these are very complex issues. But I think this is why I want to sensitize this conversation and all of us to really join this and not to leave it only to, you know, the experts, because I think this is all a collective problem. At the end, much of what we do is reflected in the democracy, right? I mean, in other words, what becomes policy and law, et cetera, in a democratic society is what people really desire, with the right level of education and the communication, et cetera. So I think this is an engagement for everyone to enter this discussion now.
Many years ago, I believe when I was young, I saw a movie which actually is a science fiction movie. It talks about technology has been so advanced that most people live for very, very long and they do not develop much diseases. So in the end, there are too many old people in the world. So they have this policy of at the birthday of a certain age, okay, they go to a factory and then they sort of finish their life. And they make hamburger out of the meat and so on. No, I thought it was a terrible movie, but...
Soylent Green.
Yeah, you saw that movie, right? Yeah. So I'm not making it up.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually comes to such a stage that if we prevent dying from cardiac disease, dying from cancer, and so on, we can prolong people's life 120, 130 years old. And that is economically maybe not sustainable. So should we focus on preventing bad disease from happening? And then when people enjoy a certain duration of life, we should actually giving up on those expensive immunotherapy and robotic surgery and just call it a day, and so that we will not be prolonging suffering, using a lot of money to lengthen a not so enjoyable life for just a few more months.
Yeah, but you have kind of contradicted yourself, because what you described was people who can live much longer and healthier. If in fact they're suffering, I agree with you. But if they're not suffering and they're totally healthy,
no,
right?
We're talking about healthy longevity.
Yes, Exactly.
Okay, so your duration of longevity is prolonged, but you do not prolong the last part, which may actually be inflicting a lot of pain to the people. But once they develop a cancer, so be it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but so the emphasis should be on healthy longevity. I think as long as we have healthy longevity, you would imagine that people not only can enjoy their lives, be more functional. And if you look at the stats I showed you earlier, you know, many countries are actually having people work much longer, and they're dependent on people who are older for the workforce, right? There's a thing called Dependency Ratio, which different countries show in terms of how many people, what percent of your workforce over 65. And increasingly, if you're healthy and you're able to do so, why not, right? So that could be part of the solution. In other words, you're just shifting your set point to a later stage in life. But when you said when they develop diseases, that's a very different story, right? I'm mainly saying that healthy longevity is a good thing. We should try to prevent diseases. But when you do have cancer, you're quite right. That becomes a different issue altogether.
So my question is, should we put more money on preventing diseases?
Of course.
Instead of treating a disease and prolonging a few months of suffering time?
I think that's always been the case. I mean, you look at the cost of technology, many cancer therapies, not including the CAR-T immunotherapy, prolong life by about 3 months and cost $250,000 US for treatment, right? But, you know, this comes back to some of the questions asked earlier. What is our public's attitude, right? Certainly in the United States, many people would say, I don't want to stop at anything. Even 3 months, I want to try that therapy. So that comes back to who's going to make these decisions about when you should have it or not, right? And back to your question, Lavender, if you can afford it, why can't I have it? So it's a very complicated issue. I think you spend most of your time thinking about those, right?
I think, Dr. Cho, this is a really exciting discussion, and I think it will actually be going on and on, but I think there will be some time limit in terms of what we can carry on. Maybe
there's a limit which I can answer these difficult questions.
Maybe, well, you'll receive a lot of emails later on. But thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dzau and Professor Chu. It is indeed our great honor that Dr. Dzau has accepted our invitation to Hong Kong. To show our appreciation, may I invite Dr. David Meng, Chairman and Group CEO, Shun Hing Group, and Professor Wai Chan, Pro-Vice Chancellor of CUHK, to present a souvenir to Dr. Dzau, please. May all guests please remain on the stage for the next photo. I would like to invite the following guests to join the group photo, please. Ms. Cynthia Mong, Director of Shun Hing Electronic Trading Company Limited. Dr. Edgar Chen, Senior Advisor to the Council. Professor Joseph Dzau, former Vice Chancellor. Mr. Eric Ng, Vice President Administration and University Secretary. And Professor Philip Chiu. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving another round of applause to Dr. Dzau for sharing his insights with us.